Hello and welcome to this special episode of Mind, the YouTube series by Darlington Mind. I'm Matt Hoss and I'm the host. Every month we look at some wonderful people working in mental health and see what impressive and vital care that they give. Today we're talking to Katie and Claire from the Nottingham-based organisation Harmless. Hello.
Hi.
How are you both doing today? Is it always quite a busy day for both of you?
Yeah, it's always busy for us. So I look after the training for Harmless, and we kind of deliver training around mental health and self-harm and suicide sort of nationwide. So yeah, it's going well. Coming live from my study in Nottingham. So
I have to say it looks really professional. I like it as well. I like the backdrop. I wish I had that. I've just kind of got some like tatty curtains and an old metal guitar. That's it. You know, I'm trying to play up to street cred and cool, but I don't think I think you've nailed it there. Do you do your training across the whole of the UK? And how have you been finding it since lockdown as well? Has it been a challenge to adapt?
Yeah, it initially was. So we do provide training nationwide, and we always have done. So normally that would mean, chucking our stuff in a car and trekking up and down the country to wherever we needed. But obviously, since lockdown in March, we really, really quickly had to learn how to use technology. So all of us who were slight technophobes are now like Zoom wizards and technical champs of Microsoft Teams and everything. And what we have seen, probably unsurprisingly, is actually a huge increase in demand for training because of the sorts of issues that COVID has brought. And maybe people have actually had a little bit of time to sit back and think, well, actually, we need to not only look after the people around us, but we need to look after our own mental health during what is a really, really difficult collective time. So yeah, we've been really, really busy. But I think, like our entire service, we like to try and see opportunity. Very much what we saw at the start of lockdown was to try and shape this into as much an opportunity for our training team as we possibly could do for people that were struggling out there.
Absolutely. And Katie, did you find that it was a similar experience on your end?
Yeah, so for us, it was a little bit different. So I'm one of the service managers for our clinical teams. So I run our suicide crisis pathway. So we were still able to operate kind of face-to-face sessions, but had to, like Claire's teams, had to learn how to use Zoom and learn how to do support sessions over Zoom. We've seen an increase in demand for our services. So we've been very much had to kind of hit the ground running and just go for it, I guess, to make sure that people have got the support in place.
It's such an interesting thing, which both of you have mentioned, that like from that March onwards, you really had to roll with the punches so fast. You had to learn on demand as well, and I think that's part of the nature of the job, where you have to kind of learn things quite quickly just to adapt. Because in every, I in my background, I work at Darlington Mind. I work in lots of different places around the northeast, and you never know what's going to hit you. You never know what kind of people you might encounter in terms of what they might be facing, and it might be something you've never really talked about before. So you have to be like willing to kind of adapt as well. And I'm glad to see and hear that you adapted so well. I would love to know a little bit more about the history of Harmless and why it was important for Harmless to be created and set up.
So we were formally established back in 2007 by our current CEO, Caroline Harrow, and we were really created in response to a very specific gap in provision around self-harm. So we kind of call ourselves a user-led self-harm prevention service, because we really take the lead from our clients, from the people who need us on the front line, and ask, what help do you need, what do you want, and how can we provide it in the best possible way, in the most flexible, timely way that we can. A lot of people who come through our doors with maybe issues that are leading them to self-harm are not eligible for care in other places. So maybe they are on waiting lists for other services because everyone is sort of overstretched and resources are really, really difficult to come by, or they are struggling with distress leading them to self-harm, but they don't have a mental health diagnosis. So maybe more kind of typical, traditional other provisions around mental health support are just not able to see them for various different reasons. So we kind of were founded to create a safety net for people who might fall in between eligibility gaps elsewhere. That gap in certain places is still still there around self-harm needs. People are sometimes too severe for one service, not quite in enough distress for another. So we kind of act as a catch-all to provide that safety net to hold people for as long as they need, really, wherever we possibly can do. And then the Tomorrow Project is the name of our sister service that looks after suicide prevention, and that came a few years later, was formally established in 2012. And really that was for us in response to a local community that was affected by a high number of suicides. And we identified another gap really around support for those who might have been exposed to or bereaved or affected by the loss of another person's suicide. And that kind of started our work around suicide crisis and suicide bereavement as well. And Katie could probably tell you a little bit more about the Tomorrow Project's work with those in crisis.
Yes, so the Tomorrow Project has got two pathways of care at the moment. We've got a suicide crisis pathway, which was designed to, like Claire said, address the gaps in current provision. So we sit within primary care and we catch those people that aren't eligible for primary care services and secondary care services. So we make sure people in crisis have got some support. We also have our suicide bereavement service, which is very, very specialist, and it supports anybody affected by suicide or a bereavement by suicide.
I think both of you do very different jobs, but also it's so equally vital as well. And so in terms of, obviously there's two different projects and you're working on different things, but is there ever a coalition, or do you ever work alongside each other for training, or is there any kind of collaboration?
Yeah, I think collaboration is really at the heart of our service, along with our user voices. So we kind of operate in a cyclical model where we will directly inform our training for members of the community that are on the front line, or wanting to support friends or family members or whoever is affected by distress or mental ill health or self-harm or suicide. We work with our clinical team to ask, hey, what is working for you, what is working for the people that you support, and how can we take that in connection with the latest academic research, models of best practice? How can we kind of combine the evidence with the research, with our client voices, and kind of mush it all together to put it into the best training package that we can, really, that is really practically applicable for everyone on the ground. So we work super close together. Our clinical provision directly informs the training content, and then the training that we run and the income we manage to generate through that goes directly back into our clinical support services. So we sort of operate in a really important cyclical model, so we can both keep ourselves going. So although our focus is really kind of separate operationally, like what we do day to day looks totally different, we're really, really close knit as a service, because we kind of have to be to make sure that we're meeting people's needs in the best way.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I get so inspired when I talk to to people in your roles, and when I work alongside other professionals in mental health, I think it's really inspiring just to feel like you're working on the same page with someone else, like you're working alongside other people who, are fighting for the same thing, especially at the moment where I'm working from home quite a lot, and you're kind of wondering if you're doing any good. But to kind of hear what you're both doing and the other colleagues on your team are doing, it really kind of fills me with a lot of hope and inspiration.
That's awesome.
Well, something I've been... So I've created a couple of questions to ask both of you personally, but I kind of, I wanted to know what you thought the biggest misconceptions that people had around self-harm and suicide. What are the kind of things which people kind of get wrong, or have mythologized or about those things?
I think the biggest one that we hear within the clinical team is that people that self-harm are doing it for attention. We hear that all the time. We hear our clients say to us that they're sometimes too anxious to go and approach, say, a certain service because they're fearful of being told that they're just attention seeking, or that they're overreacting. Yeah, I think that's the biggest one for us.
Yeah, and how does it make you feel when you hear that as well? Is it quite infuriating?
Infuriating, but also really sad that people don't take other people's distress as seriously. It just makes you feel really sad for the person that you're supporting, that they've had those experiences.
How would you typically respond to someone who, if they said it directly, saying, oh, that person's just doing it for attention? Is there any way you would educate them to say, well, actually...
I think it's always worth challenging it. I'm sure, Claire, you've got some tips that I know you guys share on your training courses that might be really helpful now.
Yeah, I think the first thing it can fill you with is that kind of sense of anger, really, I suppose. And I think it's really understandable and actually a great sign of empathy if your first reaction to that kind of comment is, that's not okay, that's not fair, that's wrong, these are the reasons you're wrong. But the reality is there is still so much, for lack of a better word, ignorance. There's a lack of understanding still in 2020 around self-harm. So I think coming from a point of understanding that, yes, that opinion is wrong, and no, it's not about attention seeking, but also challenging gently and coming from that perspective of the fact that the majority of people out there won't have had any training on self-harm. They won't understand maybe some of the nuances around it. And, you know, that comes from their view of the world. It comes from the stereotypes that are perpetuated by friends, family, media, social media, absolutely everything. So I guess it would be a case of sort of saying, first off, it's not attention seeking. Secondly, the majority of people who self-harm go to extreme lengths to keep it hidden. They really, really do. And, you know, if they come to a point where they are disclosing their self-harming to you, take that as a point of privilege, actually. You know, people don't self-harm for the fun of it. It's serving a purpose, and that purpose is to help them survive through probable extreme kinds of distress. It's not a trend, it's not a fad, it's not a fashion statement, it's not about manipulation, it's not about attention seeking. And if we think it might be, then it might just be a case of us all taking some responsibility to challenge where has that view come from, what has shaped it. And that's about education, which is why training is so important, I think.
Yes, that's what thank you both for those great answers as well. I think it's those definitely have cropped up before, and I do think there is a big old, as you mentioned, there's still a stigma around that. And I know mental health in the last decade has really evolved and grown more into like the mainstream, which is a really good thing. But I might be ignorant in saying this, but I kind of think that there's still a long way to go about talking about self-harm as well. I think that there's still a lot more to discuss about self-harm and in the reality of it as well. And do you still think there's a taboo element around discussions around suicide and self-harm?
Yeah, hugely. I mean, there's a very kind of British stiff upper lip of, you know, keep calm, carry on, crack on with it. If you add nuances around like gender or sexuality or anything on top of that, it just makes it harder and harder. Like, there are so many barriers to people just acknowledging that this is how they feel, let alone getting help and support. And yeah, sometimes if I'm, you know, in pre-COVID world, if I was going to get a haircut and people ask me what I do, I might say, yeah, I work for a mental health service. And generally the response now is, oh, right, oh, that's amazing, great work. If I say I work for a self-harm and suicide prevention service, the reaction is totally different.
Yeah, right.
Totally different.
Yeah.
And, you know, unfortunately, we do still have a long way to go. I think starting to crack the conversation is a start. But if you look at the rates of people who are struggling, who don't access help and support at maybe the time that they are in the highest parts of their distress, we definitely can't rest on our laurels. There's a long way to go.
And Katie, how about suicide as well? Do you think it's quite hard to have those conversations?
Yes, and I think there's a lot of fear around having a conversation about suicide. A lot of people are really worried about, are they going to say the wrong thing? What if having that conversation makes somebody act on any thoughts of suicide they may be having? So any opportunity our team gets to kind of have those conversations and say, look, you know, you can support somebody through suicide crisis, and you can support somebody after a bereavement by suicide. It's just really important to keep those conversations going at every opportunity, really.
What I find really handy is just hearing those things confirmed as well, like because I think if I had to kind of guess, and especially before I started working in mental health, I think with those conversations, I wouldn't know where to start, or I would feel like I might be getting it wrong. I wouldn't, especially if I was talking, or if someone confided in me that they had a friend who had been self-harming or had thoughts of suicide. I think there's a lot of, oh, I don't know what to do or say. If you could give one piece of advice to anyone watching this, what would you recommend?
I think from my perspective, it would be to just go off the back of what Katie said, have the confidence to have the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, the thing we're most fearful of is asking the question of somebody, are you self-harming, are you suicidal? And hearing the answer, yes. You know, the reality is if we give people the opportunity to share with us, they are likely to be in a better place to access help and support. And with us, as maybe the person one step removed from someone, as a friend, a relative, a family member, if we can clearly and directly offer a really compassionate way of just asking somebody, are you okay? And listening to that gut instinct, I think, to say, no, really, are you okay? Because it's all right if you're not, and I'd really, really prefer it if you could talk to me about what's happening. I think it's that, just have the confidence to have the conversation, because it might save somebody's life.
Absolutely. I've learned to be really blunt and just ask awkward questions, because it's not really that awkward. It's in my head it's awkward, and I think other people, as you said, and like that British stiff upper lip, I think people think it might be awkward, but I think in reality, if someone heard that you're trying to connect and make sure that you're okay, I think it's quite a sweet thing, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, it might be awkward, it might feel awkward, but you're still doing the right thing. And I think people can normally, they normally know that, you know, they can tell by the way you're asking that you're doing it out of care, and that's what we want people to be able to do.
How about you, Katie? Do you anything that you would love to put out there or recommend?
I think I would recommend just meeting people or responding to people genuinely, just meeting them with compassion, listen to what they're saying, you know, validate their feelings, but also recognize your own feelings. I remember when I started in this role, I remember feeling really quite worried and scared, like a lot of people do, about kind of, you know, working supporting somebody that's experiencing self-harm or suicide crisis. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that it can be really scary, not only for you, but also the person that you're supporting. And just to be aware of that.
I also want to discuss what self-harm and what suicide means as well, because obviously I don't mean in those literal terms, but I mean there's kind of a preconceived idea what self-harm is, or what symptoms of it might be. In terms of breaking the mold a little bit, and what other signs and symptoms people might have of self-harm or suicide that people might be unaware about?
So warning signs, I mean, I think for me, it's really, really difficult, because you can get a list of warning signs that somebody's in distress, and you know, from one person to the next, some people might display those symptoms, other people won't. Some people will go to extreme measures to keep everything hidden, and they will perfect that mask, and you won't see anything outwardly that causes concern. And I think that kind of just shows how individual and complex things like self-harm and suicide are. And that is the answer that no one really wants. They want a tick list of things to look out for, and there might be things to look out for. But the reality is those things are not always visible. And I think that's what makes it really tricky. So I think for me, any change in someone's behavior, any change in their mood, any withdrawal, any isolation, anything that gives you, you know, like when you see your friend, even, you know, I don't know, across the other side of the room, you get this sense that they're not quite themselves, you know, that might be a warning sign. So just check in with them at that point, out of that feeling of compassion. You know, if you look at somebody and they're making a cup of tea for themselves, and just in that moment, they look as if they're not quite there, they're not quite themselves, maybe step up the conversation just to ask if they're okay, if they want to sit down, you know, with that cup or with you and have a conversation. And to not be afraid to pick up on anything that might just be a sudden change in behavior with somebody, whether or not that means it looks like their mood has dropped or their mood has lifted. There has been some kind of change, and it's just worth, again, stepping up the conversation when you get that kind of warning sign from somebody.
I think what Claire said is really important, is that warning signs will look very different to every single person, and what I find distressing, Claire might not find distressing. So it's not even like there's, say, one type of event that will make somebody act or respond in a certain way, and just being aware, I guess, at all times of how people respond to you. Like Claire said, are they a bit more distant? Are they not looking themselves today? And just checking in twice.
Yes, that's really good. And I also love the idea of just checking in when you're having a cup of tea, because it doesn't have to be this grand intervention where you have to sit down and make a whole, but it can just be like just having just asking those questions over a cup of tea. And so and I think that's, yeah, it can be in any situation, which is an appropriate situation as well. Like I think it doesn't have to be a big build up before doing so. It can just be a quick check-in. Feel free to not answer this. What kind of coping strategies would you recommend to anyone who is suffering, or what would you recommend someone to do who might be suffering with self-harm or suicidal thoughts?
For me, I think my, I guess, top tips or the coping strategies that my clients use the most is I try and get my clients to embed self-care throughout their day. So we do things like, say, we'll make a list of three tasks they want to get done, whether it be, I don't know, walking the dog, having lunch, and sending off an email. And then for every task that's done, try and build in a self-care task. So if they walk the dog, stop by their favorite coffee shop on the way, and treat yourself and kind of celebrate all your tiny victories. And just being really kind to yourself.
Yeah, I think kind of similar. Like I think people's sort of recovery and how they cope is, again, it's going to be really individual. So work out what goals you would like to achieve personally, whether it is, I don't know, getting out of bed and brushing your teeth and getting dressed. And again, making sure that you do celebrate that, because it could be the hardest thing in your day to actually get up and do those really, really straightforward things. But I think also to listen, like tune in to yourself a little bit more and kind of respond to what you feel is coming up through the day. Build in some kind of really positive distractions if you can, and just kind of go back to the core, the foundation of knowing what makes you happy, what gives you a bit of joy. I'm not sponsored by Marie Kondo, but what sparks joy, and genuinely listen to that,
Yeah.
Because I think it's really easy when you are in distress to forget how important those little things are. And then the second you notice that things are starting to change, then reach out to somebody, have that list of people there and try if you can to reach out. But then it puts a responsibility on the rest of us to also reach in and make sure that we are checking in with people and not just assuming they're going to come to us if they need something, because when you're in distress, it's not that straightforward.
Absolutely, I completely agree, and I think it's a wonderful piece of advice. And also, just to clarify, this episode is sponsored by Netflix. Feel free to subscribe at the bottom. Please do. It's great episodes. So I know a lot of people mention mindfulness and meditation, but how important is it to be mindful or meditate, in your opinion?
I think that's really individual. I know for me personally, mindfulness doesn't work, but I know some people that I've worked with, it's the only thing that's worked. So again, I think it's knowing yourself and what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
Before we wrap up, on the website, you have a lot of what kind. If people wanted to check out Harmless, what could they do? Where could they access it? And is there anything online that they could do at home? And if someone was interested in checking Harmless and the Tomorrow Project out, like what could they do and how can they access it?
So we have a presence on pretty much every social media platform. I am in my mid-30s, so I can't remember anything to do with Instagram, but we are there, I promise.
We definitely are there.
We've got our main organisational webpage, which is harmless.org.uk, and we also post quite frequently on Twitter and Facebook. So we're Harmless UK on Twitter, Life versus Suicide, so Life vs Suicide on Twitter, and our training department has a separate account, which is Let's Talk and Learn. And we, one really simple thing that people can do is just kind of engage with us on those platforms, because we want that two-way conversation really, so that people can feel like they're kind of part of the wider community of Harmless. So yeah, I would definitely encourage that. And drop us an email, send us a DM, you know, whatever way you want to get in touch with us, we can happily have a conversation with anyone.
I have just Googled. It is Harmless underscore UK on Instagram as well. You can follow there
Thank
as
you.
well. Like, we have, that's my signposting job out the way. Yeah, just Googling. And Katie, how about you?
Yeah, like Claire said, reach out to us any way that you want to. We respond. So if somebody, say, drops us a message on Instagram, that will be passed over to, say, a clinical member of the team or to the training team, depending on where it needs to be, and we'll respond to anybody that wants to have a chat with us.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this incredibly wonderful and insightful episode of D-Mind. And yeah, thank you very much to Katie and Claire.
Thank you for having
You're
us.
welcome.